Easy explain Darwinism, natural selection. So before we get into that, just some background definitions for better understanding what natural selection is for Darwin, starting with a working definition of evolution. So when we say evolution, just talking about it as a biological process, we're really looking at any changes in a gene pool over time. And I realize here I'll have to define what a gene pool is. So it's all possible genes that can be inherited within a population from generation to generation, right? Just any genes that can be passed around, shared, swapped, transmitted as you're reproducing, right? Generation to generation within a population. And another definition here just about what a species is. So a species, properly speaking, is a population of individuals that can reproduce to create fertile offspring. And that's really the key part here. So if you look at a donkey and a horse, they can reproduce, but they create a mule that is not a fertile offspring. So that's why we say a donkey and a horse are different species. And now let's look at the evolutionary mechanism. So this is just a mechanism here, evolutionary mechanism, any process that results in evolution, that results in a gene pool changing over time. So here we'll be focusing on Darwin's main mechanism of natural selection. He'll also touch a little bit on sexual selection. We'll see that next. More recently, in more modern history, we've been doing a lot of research and studying gene flow, and that's genes moving between populations of the same species. Then there's genetic drift. This is usually more so when there's some kind of catastrophic event, like some kind of large-scale population bottlenecking event. And at last but not least, by any means, we have mutation. And this is just the random changes we see in DNA based on environmental conditions or just based on chance. So at the very least, evolution is occurring, that gene pools are changing as we go through generations, just based on mutations alone. But here we're going to look at natural selection. That was Darwin's focus. This is his philosophical theory. So this is what he says to start us off here. He says this preservation of favorable variations and the rejection of injurious variations I call natural selection. Variations neither useful nor injurious would not be affected by natural selection and would be left a fluctuating element, as perhaps we see in the species called polymorphic. So you're saying if you have something good, or something favorable, that's going to be preserved. That will be selected for. And you have something that's going to injure your survival, right? That's going to be selected against. That'll be rejected. If it's neither nor, it's not going to be affected by natural selection, right? This will just be those random elements that we see, the polymorphisms, the different shapes, the different appearances we see that are just kind of there no matter what, right? Not subject to natural selection. And then we'll move on to looking at what Darwin says about adaptations and fitness, as the saying survival of the fittest is usually attributed to him. Let's take a closer look at what that means. Darwin says extremely slight modifications in the structure or habits of one inhabitant would often give it an advantage over others, and still further modifications of the same kind would often still further increase the advantage. So if you have a good adaptation, right, we can start with this just by chance. You have a good adaptation to survive in your environment, right, to stay alive, to find food, to reproduce. You're going to be a better fit for that environment, right? That is your fitness, and you're going to survive most easily and for the longest and reproduce the most if you are the fittest. So that's how you see these things being selected for, that will be passed down and propagate and continue and over time change the whole species. Then he also brings up the human influence here. He calls that artificial selection. So men can act only on external and visible characters. Nature cares nothing for appearances, except insofar as they may be useful to any being. So here he's saying, yes, we can domesticate, we can breed dogs, cats, cows, right? But we're usually selecting what they look like. Nature doesn't care about what it looks like as long as it's useful for survival, right? So that's where the difference between natural and artificial selection comes in. And finally, we do get into an evolutionary pattern here. This is the large scale, how natural selection, how evolution occurs over time. Gradualism is very slow, very long scale. So let's look at what Darwin says here. It says, we see nothing of these slow changes in progress until the hand of time has marked the long lapse of ages. And then so imperfect is our view into long past geological ages that we only see the forms of life are now different from what they formerly were. So this idea that evolution by natural selection is so slow, it takes so long that us in our little human lives, it's very hard to see, right? It's really hard for us to see the effects of this as we look over generations and generations and generations, right? It's kind of hard to study. But we can look back at fossils, right? There's other ways that we can observe this, even though it's hard for us to do in our single, tiny little human lives. So for now, this is an introduction to what Darwin says about natural selection, and I hope it helps.